Hello everyone, Xanero Gaming coming at y'all with another video, and in today's video I do want to talk about some Digimon. There are a lot of regional events coming up for Digimon, and while we don't have a ton of them that have happened recently, I do want to try to give people some information about what the current meta maybe is looking like. So in order to do that, I am on eggmanevents.com, and he has been kind enough to post the community over the last 2 weeks a couple of different events, that have taken place since the World Convergence set has come out for the game, right? Three different events, technically, I guess, from the 23rd to the 29th. And I do want to go over these events so we can kind of see where the state of the game is. And I want to just try to give like everyone a summary of these events. And then if you yourself are going to a big regional tournament, which like I said, I will be going this weekend, what decks you can look out for people to be playing the most of, right? I do think that our meta here is going to be a little different than the meta that we've seen coming out in Japan. And I think that just deals with, we like different decks over here. I think that just boils down to it because these decks are very different than what we are seeing currently run amok over there. But starting off with the event on the 23rd of this past month, we do have Eagle's Nest, the 414 Win-A-Box tournament, right? And in this tournament, you do see that there are 8 different archetypes that topped, and they were all different 8 decks. Armor Rush, Digimon GX, Crossheart, Ancient Greymon, Red Purple Imperial Dramon, 1 Royal Knights, 1 Hunters, and 1 UG Imperial Dramon? I guess Blue Green. Maybe it's what that one is supposed to be. But these are the decks that did top in the tournament. I do think that all of these are kind of a good representation of what you could expect to, see in a big tournament. All 8 of these decks actually are decks that I would be, expecting to see in the tournaments if you are going to big tournaments and competitive events. Really interesting that they all had a, 8 different decks top. This event was 30 players, so a decent amount of pool to, pull from. The only surprising ones I think here is to see this, Digimon GX deck kind of show up in this tournament. That'll be interesting list to like maybe look at. And I think it is hard to try and really tailor your deck to play against one of these decks in the current game, because there are so many viable, strong decks at the moment in the card game for us here. And this Digimon GX deck getting second place is very, very surprising. I would not have expected Digimon GX to really show up big time, but the Digimon players never die, and Digimon GX is a really, really powerful card. I do feel like from what I've heard from my side of the community, I do know that, Armor Rush, Red Hybrids are still out there. Both the different versions of the Imperial Dramon are out there. But the most prevalent deck I think that most people are worried about is Royal Knights. I do think that it is such a easy deck to pilot. It has an engine that is super, super strong that you will see it in a lot of these, big tournaments that are coming up and doing really, really well. Going on to the 421 event here, you can see that there is a little shakeup here. 3 Hunters decks, 2 Ancient Garurumons, 1 Purple Hybrid, 1 Royal Knights, and 1 Red Purple Imperial Dramon. I know that the Hunters have definitely been a deck that has shown up recently as a popular deck to play because people were realizing just how consistent of an engine this deck was. And there are some new cards from the World Convergence set that does help this out. Getting a new Dramon Superior Mode and another line of the purple cards with the new Tamer definitely helps this deck be super consistent. And just having another big body now, where whereas before your opponent could wall you out maybe with a big body, now that's a little bit harder to do because the new Dramon Superior Mode, say that 5 times in a row. It can get very, very beefy, big beefy purple body. But looking at the order of things, it did look like Purple Hybrid did win the tournament, and it is cool to see that Purple Hybrid's, not really going anywhere, and that people are finding new and interesting ways to build this deck. I do think it is mainly still all based around the Velgramon Loop shenanigans, but with a couple of different packages at the top end and sub-packages of, like good floodgates that help them in their Royal Knights matchup. And if I had to assume, that's probably exactly what happened. The Purple Hybrid player probably just, had enough floodgates to really play well into these Royal Knight decks, because the purple hybrid deck can just run all the good purple floodgates, shut down what Royal Knights are trying to do, and then hopefully just get through with their tamer hybrid cards going in. Third place was Hunters, and you can see through here just a couple of different of the Hunters and the blue hybrids showing up in full force. Hybrid decks are not going anywhere, and if there are decks that are like I do think that Royal Knights is the best deck in the format at the moment, and when there is such a like clear-cut, really powerful deck, it allows for people to play some of these other decks that have good matchups into it, which I do think are all three of these decks. The red, purple, Imperial Dramon, blue and red hybrids, and Hunters decks. I think that they all do a really good job of rushing down these Royal Knight decks, and I do think that that is why they are performing so well in these tournaments, because a lot of players are probably on the Royal Knight deck, and these other decks are able to, you know, eat them up, rush them down, and do really, really well. Now, going on to the latest event, this is the event that Eggman ran. I was so sad that I didn't get to play in this. I unfortunately had to work, but he did the triple win-up box, and this is going to look very, very different than what we've seen in these last two tournaments, right? I do think that this listing of 3 Sakuyamon X's, 1 Armor Rush, 1 Royal Knight, 3 Magidramon, 1 Medusamon, and 1 Gallantmon are very, very different than the pie charts for these other two, with the main inclusion being this Sakuyamon X deck showing up and the Magidramon deck. If you do not know what Magidramon does and you're going to a big tournament, you are definitely being very negligent. You should test against Magidramon decks. They can do a lot of shenanigans, you know, digivolving for, you know, all the way up their chain with 2 memory, swinging into your life for 2 checks, and also trashing a card and then leaving you at 2 checks on your second turn. And if they have a tamer set up, they can do it again and really put you in a tough spot. Another deck that is showing up here is the Medusamon, which is also kind of runs in that same aspect. It doesn't have bodies that delete themselves to just trash, but the Medusamon can, on turn 2, swing and hit you for 5 checks. I had it do it to me. One of my testing buddies do it to me recently this week, and it is very, very scary. If they just see, you know, a training and a rookie on their first turn, and you pass them over 2 to 3 memory, they can hit you for 5 checks, and it is very, very scary. And like we said, the most prevalent one from this tournament was the Sakuyamon X's. I think that it's just taking time for a lot of people here in NA to probably, you know, latch onto this deck a little bit more than, as I guess, suppose we've seen, you know, elsewhere. But people are starting to see that Sakuyamon X is a very viable, very oppressive deck. It is not fun to play against. They just loop through their aces, and they play a lot of event cards that let them digivolve for free, and then they just push you out of the game with all of these Shine Greymon Ruin modes, just keeping you from playing the game. It's not a lot of fun, but no surprise to see the Royal Knights and Gallantmon and Armor Rush in here. I do think that Gallantmon is a, you know, really powerful deck that you have to watch out for too. I do think that that deck beats itself sometimes because it runs so many pieces, and it is a super consistent deck. But sometimes you just don't see the full lineup. Now, I do know there's a lot of ways to make this deck really consistent to where that's not as much of an issue. But Gallantmon is very, very powerful, and you do need to prepare for Gallantmon. Although, like with Gallantmon, I don't think there's a lot of counterplay. I think that if Gallantmon players just see their full lineup in their hand, you kind of just they just do what they do. And you just have to hope to, you know, have at least multiple layers of protection. And even then, it doesn't really matter if they get straight into the Gallantmon, because it's going to be like 21,000 DP on your turn, and you're not going to have a lot of ways to get over it. Even if you de-digivolve at the level 5, still ends up being like, I think, 18,000 with the boost. So you're in a world of hurt if Gallantmon just sees its cards. I do recommend going first against a Gallantmon, just so that way they can't move up on their second turn and pressure you with the Gallantmon X. But Armor Rush did win this event. Austin, shout out to them for making it happen with Armor Rush. And it looks like Royal Knights may be very interesting. 2 ties from both of these players. And then one of them probably just got the edge out from the tiebreakers. Very interesting to see that. You know, they only had 5 rounds when they had 38 players. That makes about sense. But Armor Rush is in a good spot. Like I said, it does really well, I think, against Royal Knights. as long as the Royal Knight players don't see a blocker early, which that does happen sometimes, right? Like if the Royal Knights go second and they don't see a blocker body to put down, if you are an aggressive deck, you can really punish them on that turn 2. But even with all these decks, teching to play against Royal Knights, they are still doing well in these tournaments, and that's why I think that it is the best deck in the format at the moment. And I really hope that the deck gets hit on the ban list. I think that the options are the issue. Not to get into it too much, but I think that they should not gain memory from playing the options. The options do help facilitate the deck, but I do think that you should have to pass your turn and pay that full memory for those options and not be like, play this option for 6, but actually keep my turn because I'm going to gain 3. That feels really, really bad because you're setting yourself up and you're still keeping your turn. And I think that those are the main issue cards with the Royal Knights. If you've listened to me at all about Digimon, I do not like any deck that messes with the mechanics of the game. I think that the devs of the game are really lazy, bringing in aspects of the breeding area and then taking that as a that used to be a safe spot for Digimon. And now it makes it really confusing to teach people the game of Digimon when there are decks like Royal Knights and 7 Great Demon Lords, adding this aspect of like, well, you can't play in the breeding area, but actually I can, and my whole deck revolves around this, and you don't have any cards that target my breeding area. So I hope that in the future they make cards that target breeding area then, because they're making cards that do things in breeding areas, and there's no counterplay to these cards because you can't mess with those cards. So I do think that the devs have gone really, really wrong. It's the only gripe I have with Digimon. It's my favorite card game at the moment. I'm sorry to go on a tear about the Royal Knights, but I do want everyone that's subscribed to the channel to know my opinions about this. So that way you can just tell me I'm wrong or whatever. It doesn't really matter to me too much. It's just how I feel. But they never should have messed with the breeding area. It's supposed to be a mechanic of the game that's safe. And long story short, I don't like that, right? Like, just keep messing with how we had the game going in the actual area. And if they are going to keep making these decks that mess with the breeding area, I do expect them to give us some tools that help us, go full in, though. Don't let some decks do breeding area things and then not have any other deck have outs to it. Even if it's a whole set that they take half the cards and be like, all right, every color gets a card that says delete an egg in your breeding area. Something like that. And then that would give you counterplay to where these Royal Knight decks would actually have to think about some of their deck builds as well. But that's my tangent on Royal Knights. I do think that the deck is an issue because it's not very pilot dependent. It is just a mechanic dependent that if you just see certain things, you get to that point in the game, you just win it. And it is non-interactive for your opponent because you can't do anything about the Kingdra Seal at all outside of running floodgates. That they can just out anyways with their cards. But that is my tangent back into these decks. Digimon did get 3rd place, and I do, like I said, I have a friend who has this deck built, and I do think that he is taking it to the next regional, and I hope that he does really well with this deck because it is a very skillful deck, making sure you have certain lines and certain cards in your inheritables, and making sure you don't misplay, not searching or grabbing certain pieces, and it can just, win the game so fast and get so much value for on deletion. Now, I do think that it really loses hard to floodgates, but some of the floodgates that Royal Knights are losing to are not the floodgates that Digimon are losing to. They're very different floodgates, and people, don't have the opportunity to run those floodgates to stop Digimon. So I think that's why Digimon is doing so well right now, because those same floodgates that stop Royal Knights don't actually stop Digimon. You would have to put a different floodgate package in your decks to stop it. Digimon is a really cool, fun deck. I like to see that people have been playing it. Something I do think that is also not very fun is Sakuyamon X, and there are 3 tops here, 4th, 6th, and 7th place in this tournament with the Sakuyamon decks. I do think that this deck is a little annoying. I think that, Ruin Mode is such a powerful card, and they never hit Death Xmon, and Death Xmon in its heyday was, I think, just as prevalent as Ruin Mode probably is, maybe not as good. I do think Ruin Mode is a better card. But there's just something with this deck that doesn't feel so good. It's a very do what it does kind of like, I don't know. I don't like the deck. It is, like doing what it does, but I do expect something else to happen to this deck. Maybe if we get another ban list, maybe they do put Ruin Mode at 1, and it'll keep all these other decks from abusing Ruin Mode, but I don't know if that would fix the deck in any case. I do think that it's just something we have to live with. I do think there is a lot of ways to play around one Ruin Mode on the board, the flat 5k, but outside of that, there's not a lot you can do against this deck. This deck either sees and does what it does, or it doesn't, and you kill the aces they just didn't draw into the level 6s to digivolve into, and then now you just kind of win the game because they're not able to do what they're doing. But it is a very interesting deck. I know that this deck very much fits the playstyle of like almost like the security control players have went from playing security control to playing Sakuyamon. Even though they don't do the same thing, it's like an inevitability deck. Like they're going to do these things. It's very clear paths to how they get there, and if you can either out the ruin mode stack or not, is like, you know, can you do it? Can you play with -5k DP on your board, do all your stuff, and answer my board? If you cannot, I'll progressively play another ruin mode. Now you're on another turn of the ruin mode tax, and that's what this deck does to you. I do think that if you are going into, you know, a big tournament, I think that kill spells should become more prevalent in the game. I think a lot of people are missing out on this aspect of the game. We have a lot of great cards that just absolutely destroy Digimon, but people are not putting them in their decks. I think that Heaven's Judgment is a really good card that a lot of decks can be taking. These red decks, Gaia Force, or, you know, all these other different red cards that red has, you know, the Bergermon one, all these other things that just kill Digimon. I think that now decks need to go back to adding 2 or 3 of those cards, so that way they can out some of these boards that the Sakuyamon can put out. And I think that that's where Medusamon and Gallantmon come up well, because they can do that, right? Interesting to see that so many Sakuyamons did so well, but I do think Medusamon and Gallantmon are decks that can out these big boards, because they get to delete these Digimon and just trash security, which is really, really strong. But these decks are not going anywhere. Medusamon is really scary. Gallantmon is really, really powerful. One thing that I am a little curious on is to see, you know, like no Magna X's. Like the Armor Rush is doing really well, and I think it's because it has a better matchup into the Royal Knights. I think overall that the Digimon Trading Card Game is in a healthy spot in the meta at the moment. I am waiting till this next weekend to maybe do a meta report. Just waiting for this regionals to happen for the next couple weekends, and then I will do a meta report video kind of going over all these cards and decks and where I rank them. I do think that at the moment, Royal Knights and Sakuyamon seem to be the 2 decks that I think are, you know, the strongest decks at the moment that you probably need to prepare for if you go into a tournament. But I think there are so many decks that you need to watch out for that it is a good position to be in as a player, because you have a lot of different outlets to like what you want to play, right? So in all aspects of it, I do think that Digimon is in a very healthy spot at the moment, and I think that we can look forward to some really cool, interesting turnout events. But I want to know what you guys think. What do you think is going to come out of this weekend's regionals? And what do you think, what decks are going to do the best? What deck are you taking at regionals? I want to hear it in the comments below. Leave this video a like. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I appreciate everyone hanging out with me today. Peace.